two speakers we have to my left are one, Mr. Krishnan Das, ex-CEO of Procter & Gamble in India, and then post that was Managing Director for Procter & Gamble in their global worldwide strategy planning division. An author of a number of books. I think the one which stands out in my mind, of course, is India Unbound, a book which clearly chronicles history of India over the many years and the events which have taken place. So no better person to discuss the events of the present moment with a man like him. Along with him I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Mr. Shekhar Gupta, obviously associated with the Indian Express and the Express Group for many years, and that's where he's known. But those of you who know India well would know him probably as a leading TV journalist, where we see him on a program. I'm not sure how often, Shekhar, but it's called Walk the Talk, and it's a program which is clearly well sought after, and the people he gets to get up there and speak and get them to open up where they normally don't open up as much. So he's a man, again, who's been around for a long time. Has very strong views on the country, on what's happening in the country. And I think two people to debate the next few years of where India goes is what we have them here for. I'm looking forward to an interesting debate. And associated with them is my colleague Neelkan Mishra, a man who probably has even stronger views on India, at times not very positive from my perspective. Neelkan's our India strategist and one of our leading analysts in the Indian team, and he's going to be moderating the session today. With that, I'm going to leave it to the three of them, and hope we have a nice and active dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mickey. Welcome to the session. Mickey's done the introductions. There are times when even investors and analysts start looking beyond earnings and corporate meetings and start looking towards Delhi. And sometimes when you look long enough and you see almost no reaction to a precipitously falling growth rate in the economy, you start questioning some very basic fundamental things. I mean, can this nation of 1.2 billion people ever form a consensus? Have we ever had a strong state? What's going to happen in, say, 9 to 12 months when we do go in for the elections? Do we go in for another repeat of 96 to 98 when we had 4 governments in 2 years, or we go in for another a lackluster hung kind of government which takes no decisions at all? So I can't think of anyone better to address some of these things. We can start with our management guru, Mr. Gurcharan Das, and after that we'll have Shekhar speak, and then we will have about 15 minutes of Q&A. Mr. Das.
Let me quickly tell you that my idea of such a guru that he talked about is someone who's good at understanding GU, but relatively useless. RU. In case you fall asleep while I'm talking, you will have the consolation of being able to read what I'm going to say in today's op-ed in the Financial Times, where some of the same themes in a burst of good timing that the FT has produced. Just 2 years ago, India was the envy of the world. It was growing at 8.5%. It had been the second fastest growing economy in the world for years together. It was creating masses of jobs, lifting millions out of poverty, and doing all this as a democracy. A smart Chinese businessman who has invested $250 million in the Indian market asked me to explain. He said that, yes, your rise of India has been because of the reforms, but 64 countries have done the same reforms that you have done. So why did you become the second fastest growing economy in the world? I did not have a good answer for him. But today, look at us. Growth has plunged from almost 9% for 5 years in a row to down to 5 or 4.5 in the last quarter, and it has brought a lot of pain. We forget the pain behind these numbers. 1% of growth represents 1.5 million jobs, which are lost when you go down and they are gained when you go up. Each job creates 3 indirect jobs, and each job supports a family of 5 people. So just do the maths. The pain these people have brought is to 120 million people, and they're not going to forget it in the coming election. And so what we have today is that inflation is persistent and is not coming down. Thank God the Reserve Bank made a concession today. You may have heard a few minutes ago that they have dropped the interest rate by 25 basis points. So this is the second drop during this calendar year. And this should help growth. But we have an unsustainable fiscal deficit, even though it's been capped in the last budget. And we have a more serious current account deficit. So what happened? That's the logical question, that you should fall from such a precipitous point. Well, a number of things happened, but if you have a clear view of history, then you will see that this government, and particularly Sonia Gandhi, who is the head of the party, the leading party of this government, made a disastrous mistake goaded by her coterie of activists, NGOs, leftist activist NGOs. And no one in this government dared to tell the emperor that the emperor had no clothes. And so they decided that the reforms were actually trivial, that they were not really helping the poor, they were really helping only the rich. And therefore, they decided to make a very flawed choice between growth and equity with a bogus slogan of inclusive growth. And so the focus shifted from building roads, power plants, to giveaways to the poor, loan waivers to the farmers, jobs, make work jobs, subsidized energy, subsidized food, free power to farmers, and on and on. And this, when you have these giveaways which are not backed by production, this led to inflation. It led to the growth plunged, and it led to an unsustainable deficit. But how could this mistake have been made under the watch of the most brilliant economists, PhDs in economics from Cambridge University, who were running this government? And I think the mistake was they got away with it. Sonia Gandhi and this coterie got away with it because actually these reformers had not sold the reforms to Sonia Gandhi. Nobody had told her that there's a difference between being pro-market and pro-business. Nobody had explained that pro-market means that you actually create competitive markets, which lead to lower costs, lower prices, higher quality of jobs, which help everybody. And this leads to a rules-based capitalism. Whereas pro-business means that you retain the power within the government with ministers and bureaucrats to make economic decisions, and this leads to crony capitalism. And so, it reminds me that Margaret Thatcher used to say that I spend only 20% of my time doing the reforms, but 80% of the time selling the reforms. Now, if they had sold the reforms to the Congress Party and to Sonia Gandhi and to the people of India, they would not have done this sort of silly business. And it's quite extraordinary that in a country which gives the most astonishing freedom to its people, religious freedom, political freedom, freedom of the press, and all forms of freedom, does not give economic freedom to its people. And that's why India is ranked 117th on the Freedom Index. And in a country where 2/5 of the people are self-employed, it takes 42 days to start a business, and it's 132 ranked in the ease of doing business. So this is really a problem. Partly it goes down to the fact that there is the rhetoric of the country, and therefore reforms are done by stealth. Only in the last few months, let me say, for the first time after a very long time, have we actually heard reforms being talked about. They have come out of the closet. And that's a good sign. That is certainly a good sign. Now, a lot of people think that this is also the result of the fact that we have a weak state. And they think the weak state is a recent phenomena, could be because of coalition politics, could be because of a weak prime minister. But the truth is that India has always had a weak state. Unlike China, which has always had a strong state and a weak society, India has always had a strong society and a weak state. And therefore, China's history is a history of empires, and India's history is a history of competing kingdoms and of political disunity. The emperor in China gave the law, and then he interpreted the law. In India, the law, dharma, preceded the king, and the law and the job of the king was to uphold dharma, but the interpreter of the law was the Brahmin. So very early on, in one of the first kingdoms, Magadha, 6th century BC, you had created a liberal division of powers, which weakened the state. And this is why, in fact, the oppression in India never came from the state. It came from society. And the answer to that oppression was, of course, the Buddha, the spiritual entrepreneur who came along every so often and reduced the oppression. So therefore, and also another facet of India, which I think is important to understand, that both China and India were peopled by migrants from Central Asia. In the case of China, they assimilated into one Han identity. In India, they came, and we didn't assimilate them, we accumulated them into 2,200 subcastes. And so if China is like a soup, India is like a salad bowl, and you can see all the identities. And therefore, in 1947, this diverse country could only have become a democracy. And therefore, today, India is rising from below by the people, unlike China, which is rising from above through an amazing infrastructure built by an elite. And I think this is really important to understand the limitations when we get frustrated by the pace of reforms in India. And so India's story is, that's why my new book is called India Grows at Night. I don't complete the full sentence. The full sentence is India grows at night when the government sleeps. But my argument is that India must also grow during the day. And therefore, I make a liberal case for a strong state. And a strong state is one with three pillars. It is a state with an executive which can take firm, determined action when required. That action is bound by the rule of law, and it's accountable to the people. So that's really where we need to go. And today, the answer to this is, frankly, my hope is with about a third of India today, which is the aspiring new middle class. And no politician in India is talking to this class, except recently Narendra Modi. And this class, the rest of our politics are politics of grievance. The Congress party politics are politics of, oh, you poor fellow, you lost out in liberalization, globalization, so we must give you all these free giveaways. The BJP's normal rhetoric was, oh, you are a victim of 1,000 years of Muslim rule, poor fellow. And the caste parties, of course, you are a victim of upper caste oppression, and therefore we must give you reservations. So the point is that today the space right of center in Indian politics, and Shekhar will actually go much deeper into, in a few seconds, he'll go much deeper into the politics of the country. But let me just say the space right of center for a secular, that secular space is empty. So either one of the parties existing parties can fill that space, or a new party could come and fill that space. Both look unlikely. And frankly, the only person who is filling that space is Narendra Modi, who makes us liberals in India uncomfortable. However, his appeal will have to go far beyond Gujarat in order for him to become acceptable. But meanwhile, he, for the first time, brings a rhetoric of aspiration, of action, to a tired political landscape. So let me close at that. I did have comments for you about the short term, about interest, about rates, about what needs to be done in the next 6 months, what reforms are coming, all the things you wanted me to talk about. But perhaps we can take that up.
Yes, we can.
And let Shekhar now take over.
Yes.
And we can take up these specific questions in the minds of investors in our Q&A.
Well, thank you. Let me say that nothing pleases any speakers more than to see a full hall, and that to post-lunch on the second day of a conference when people begin to flag a little bit. So thank you very much for being there. Let me take the last question first, so the questions posed by Neelkant, the one about India's future, the evolving role of the state and the economy. Because addressing this helps put the other two questions in context about economic reforms, their political viability, and of course the direction of Indian politics in a crucial year. I've also distributed a primer. It's something we call a political primer. Just a little bit about the cast of characters in Indian politics, and a few issues and our institutions. I promise you we update it every couple of months, quite substantively. Yet most of the characters in this remain the same. So I mean, it's a sort of more complicated way of saying more things change, more they remain the same, but things change all the time. With this, I've also been immodest enough to include three of my latest columns. I write a weekly column called National Interest, Now 3 columns because in 3 on successive weeks, I focused on one connected issue, which is the direction of India's politics now. Given my notoriously short attention spans, that's also something that my children will confirm to you, and they are not children anymore, even if I am 55, not 62. I don't remember having focused on a theme like this over 3 weeks in the past, so I thought it was useful to have these here. And we'll talk about those ideas a little bit later. Where does India stand today? All of you, most of you have read, or at least you've read the reviews of Alan Greenspan's Age of Turbulence. So India is right now in that stage of kind of euphoria and fear. There is exuberance and there is fear. Exuberance because we think that our sheer numbers, our arithmetic, our demographic dividend, which we like to talk about, or unbuilt roads, unbuilt bridges, unbuilt ports, unbuilt power plants, in this case, built but not utilized power plants because coal is not available, unbuilt housing, unbuilt schools will keep our economy growing. There's an endless source of fuel. And there's a genuine fear that we are now messing up, that everything is stalling, nothing will work. Now, you've seen the recent flurry of reforms, incremental steps, but frankly, some of what has happened in the last few weeks is quite phenomenal. And what surprises me is how little adverse reaction it has drawn. For example, in India, to now institutionally establish a mechanism for increasing the price of diesel, even if slowly, every month. In India, to completely free up the price of petrol and to limit the amount of cooking gas that a family can get at a subsidized price. Now, these are not changes which are brought about on in a one-day decision, which is like upping the price of diesel by 2 rupees or 1 rupee. These are institutionalized changes. And they make it much easier for successor governments to take this forward, because we haven't seen any political party saying that if we come to power, we'll roll back these changes, because these changes everybody would have liked to bring about, but they were all afraid to. But this has been done. So this is and there are many such changes which have come about. Now let me quickly run through some of the rising new trends. Many are new, many are not that new, but they need to be listed in Indian society, economy, and politics. Number one, all of you know what's happening to India's demographics. Call it the rise of the young. Over 60% of India's population is below 30. India's dependency ratio is today 0.6, which is not that great. It's comparable to many other developing countries. But what makes India stand out is that you will see a sharp decline in this ratio over 25 years. In fact, in 25 years, India will have the best dependency ratio for any country in the world. That's when China will go the other way. This has led to urbanization. There is rise of the city. The 2011 census showed that the number of rural Indians had declined by about 4 percentage points, from 72.19 to 68.84. In reality, the number may be a little higher. But going ahead, that balance will change much faster. In fact, McKinsey has already said that by 2030, 590 million people will live in cities in India, which is twice the population of United States. And in the next 10 years, 7 provinces of India, 7 states, will have more people living in the cities than in villages. So those are the big changes happening in India. The other big change, which has both implications, political as well as economic, is the rise of the states. Indian constitution was drafted as a federal constitution. For the first 40 years of our republic, there was no federalism in India, because the same party controlled the center and the states. Mrs. Gandhi controlled the Congress party, or the Gandhi, before her father, more than her father. They chose who would be their candidates, and all their candidates won. The joke used to be, if Mrs. Gandhi puts up a lamppost or a donkey as a candidate, he will win. And the fact is, we elected many lampposts, and I say with care, but donkeys, just because they had a party ticket. We didn't bother who the candidate was. And then things began to change. We had anti-incumbency come in. We reached a stage in our politics where nearly 80% of our sitting legislators were getting defeated. And that's when this cozy arrangement broke. When Mrs. Gandhi was in power, she would dismiss elected governments in the states like this. I think if I remember correctly, in her 3 terms, she
58.
fired 58 governments. In the last 10 years, only about 9 have been fired, and these are governments in very small states where the small size of the assembly makes majorities very difficult. In fact, there have been many correctives put in place by Indian Supreme Court and by convention and by Indian presidents that now make it virtually more or less impossible for a government in Delhi, even if it had a brute majority, to dismiss a state government. Otherwise, this government would have dismissed Narendra Modi's government in Gujarat many times over. But you can't do it anymore. So that has led to the rise of the states. Now, real power in India is with the chief ministers, it's with the states. I mean, to give you a crude example, if the Prime Minister of India loved me, or if the Finance Minister of India loved me, they couldn't give me 10,000 rupees out of government funds. They might have to dip into their own pockets if they wanted to give me even a birthday present, or they might have to, if they were really clever like Indian politicians, they'll tell some fixer to call some fixer to call some fixer to give me maybe more than 10,000 rupees. But they have no access to anything. Whereas the Chief Minister of a state has access to enormous discretionary funds. He can give me land, he can give me a school, he can give me a college, he can give me permission to set up a housing colony. He can put me in jail. He can put me in jail on a Thursday when Friday is a public holiday, and he can make sure that the magistrate or the judge is on leave on Monday and Tuesday. So I spent a full week in an Indian jail, or what may be even worse, in a police lockup. It's not a nice thing. So the real power has now gone to the states. Center now has to negotiate with the states. Center has no leverage with the states, very little leverage with the states, which is a wonderful thing because that's how this constitution was structured. So negotiations take place. Sometimes some states refuse to implement certain policies that other states accept. When VAT was introduced in India, a majority of the states accepted VAT after a long period of negotiation, but some did not, including some very important states. They came in the tent later, but they did not. In India, urban land ceiling was imposed by Mrs. Indira Gandhi during the emergency. It was one of the really awful laws she passed in an illegitimate parliament during the emergency, when she had suspended our constitution more or less. Center then passed an enabling legislation repealing that law. Now, each state government then had to further pass legislations ratifying that repeal. Many of these states have still not done so, including West Bengal, Tamil Nadu. Large states have not done so. So India has now become, power in India has shifted from the center to the states, and nothing reflects it more beautifully than the current state of negotiations on the introduction of GST. Everybody says that if pan-national GST is introduced in India,
Goods and services.
Goods and services tax, it will add to maybe 1.5 to 2% to India's GDP. But states have concerns. It affects manufacturing states in a certain way. It affects raw material producing states and consuming states in different ways. So they are all negotiating. States that think they will lose taxes are asking for compensation that's being provided for. And who is heading the committee to lead these negotiations? It is the finance minister of an opposition-run state, Bihar in this state. And this minister is from the BJP, which is the main opposition party, which stands at a wide ideological divergence from the ruling party. So that is the most virtuous part of the rise of the states. Center has to talk to the states, states have to talk to the center, but it's mostly done through negotiation and not through diktat. Then a couple more things. There is, in fact, I will give you just a little piece of research. There was a national election study in 2004 that found that for every 10 voters to whom central government mattered more, there were 17 for whom their state government mattered more. That's why I say Indian politics has now become like a best of 9 sets tennis match. And who are these 9 sets? Which are these 9 sets? These are the 9 major states in India where change takes place. I don't want to bore you all with details, but these 9 states together between themselves add up to 351 seats in a house of 543. That's our national parliament. So any coalition which wins 5 of the 9 will get to about 200. 200 is the new 272 in Indian politics. Because if one coalition gets 200, then about 70 odd seats or maybe nearly 100 seats will be controlled by parties whose ideology is entirely fungible with power. So they will go join hands with anybody who's likely to set up the government in India. So the fight in India is over these 9 states. These 9 states will swing one way or the other. Each one will swing one way or the other, depending on who the chief minister is, how well is the chief minister doing, which party has good state leaders. So times when India had large pan-national dynasties or leaders are now gone. So that is the first article of the 3 that I have appended in that little thing. That there's a central fact to Indian politics now, which the Gandhi family itself knows, Sonia and Rahul, which is that in a country where about 15 dynasties are rising all over the country, one dynasty is declining. That is the Gandhi dynasty. So Gandhi dynasty's ability to get votes across the country has declined heavily now. You ask elected MPs from Gandhi family, from their party, and they say, look, we need the Gandhis to keep the party together, but I have to go and get my own votes. Whereas about 15 odd dynasties, local dynasties have risen in different parts of India, whose appeal no national party can cut through. One of them acted up this morning, DMK in Tamil Nadu, a southern state, which has withdrawn its support to the UPA government in protest against UPA, what they see as UPA government's soft approach to Sri Lanka government over atrocities on their fellow Tamils on the other side. So these are the big changes. And what this has done is, this has shifted the national discourse from politics of grievance to the politics of aspiration. We began seeing it about 10 years back. Now this is a confirmed phenomenon in Indian politics. And that is the most virtuous term in Indian politics. Now, most of the discourse now is about Bijli, Sadak, Pani, Padhai, Sehat, which is power, roads, water, health, education, and jobs. So whoever seems more likely to provide this is more likely to go ahead and do well. Now, politics. In the bunch of papers we've left on with you, there's a graphic if you would look at that. Now, this was in the second of these 3 articles. If you fold this graphic in the middle, you will find one is almost exactly the mirror image of the other. It almost sits on top of the other. I mean, I had not imagined it. I just thought there was a political phenomenon in this country, but once we plotted it, we found it to be such a remarkable piece of statistical evidence of the phenomenon that I'm complaining about. That while our voters have changed, aspirations of our people have changed, our politics has remained frozen for almost 2 decades. Now you see something, 2 important factors. One, you see 1998-99, when NDA gets more or less a decisive majority over the Congress party, over what became UPA later. Both parties have exactly the same number of votes, 25.82 for Congress and 25.59 for BJP. But one gets a majority, the other looks like really in the boondocks. This is when Congress got its worst score ever, 116. Also see percentages in about 96, 97. Congress is 28.80, BJP is 20.29. Come to 2009, Congress is 28.85, exactly where they were 20 years back, and BJP is 18.8, almost exactly where they were 20 years back. What that tells you is that India's politics was defined in the early 90s by various things, which I don't want to detail now because we don't have time. But no leader or leadership has arisen in India to challenge those ideas, to come up with a real new idea. So in 20 years, our politics has moved the same way. What this figure of 25.82 and 25.59 in the middle tells you is that what determines who will rule India and who will sit in the opposition for 5 years is very little. Usually it's 1 to 2% of votes, swinging this way or that. So in this situation, if a leader or a leadership could come up with an idea that could make 4 or 5% vote to swing in India, you could have a landslide. Is such a thing likely to happen? there is a delicious prospect, but chances are it will be tough because Indian politics for 20 years has been divided. The essential fault line in Indian politics has been identity. Some parties do not need the Muslim vote, so they can take one line on the issue of what we call as secularism or equal opportunity or equality of our citizens. Some parties need the Muslim vote, so they are sort of aggressively secular. The two sets of parties cannot come together. And we know that in any divided and diverse democracy, the sum of all insecure minorities is always greater than the power of a divided majority. You've seen that with the Obama election last year in America. So that is where India's politics stands now. In the middle of this, we have the rise of this new leader who's drawing a lot of interest. His name is Narendra Modi. Those of you from India know him. Those from overseas, he's a minister. He's the chief minister of a state called Gujarat, which is a prominent but not a leading state in India. He's from the BJP. Initially, you would say he was from the extreme right of the BJP because he came in 2002. Big massacres of Muslims were carried out in his state, obviously with complicity of his state government. 1,000 people killed in 2002 in the presence of live TV cameras, Robi vans. It's 1,000 too many killed. But people were killed. It seems like he's got away with it. As we speak today, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of UK is meeting him. Some of his ministers have gone to jail for long periods, convicted for serious crimes. Many of his policemen, in fact, it looks like half his senior police officers are in jail on charges of murder, extortion, kidnapping, etc., etc., etc. But he survived, and he's now beginning to redefine his politics. He's not abused Muslims for a long time. He's not even abused the Pakistanis for a long time now. He's even been careful abusing the Gandhi family for some time. So he's trying to reposition himself and restructure his politics. So that's the third article, and that I will close my argument there, that time has now come maybe for somebody to break this stalemate in Indian politics. Only two leaders can break it. One is Rahul Gandhi on the Congress side. One is Narendra Modi on the BJP side, because there's no doubt that he will take over the BJP's mantle of BJP's leadership going ahead to late 2013 or 2014. Each one has to change his basic instinct. For Rahul Gandhi, his party's politics has always been deep pink. People like Dr. Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram, Narasimha Rao, they were aberrations. They came in, they changed a few things, and then the immune system of the party struck back, and then the party came back into its own. Similar in the BJP, the party's basic politics instinct is anti-Muslim. It's insecure about Muslims, about Pakistan. It is xenophobic. So either leader, or hopefully from my point of view as a journalist, if both the leaders can defy these old shibboleths and come up and sort of confect a new ideology or a new politics, it will be a very interesting turn in Indian politics. I suspect one of them will try doing it. That's Narendra Modi. Jury is still out on the other. That's Rahul Gandhi.
Thank you, Mr. Das Shekhar. This was very interesting, some very interesting points that came out. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. Maybe I'll start off with a question myself. You know, a lot of what you said is very optimistic longer term, that there are innate abilities that India has, the rise of the CMs, the chief ministers. But somehow the near term looks quite abysmal, and none of what you said gives us comfort or hope on that. So maybe we'll start with you. What do you think happens to politics in the next 6 to 12 months?
Look, I think, first of all, I should repeat the disclaimer that Credit Suisse puts in all its documents. Don't base your investment decisions on what I say or what I've written in the stuff given to you. But look, in India, instability has, in fact, in all democracies. See, in democracies, instability is a fake notion, because stability in democracies is provided by institutions. A democracy can have 5 elections in 5 years. It doesn't mean you're unstable, right? It means there is churning, there is action. so I don't see instability the same way you might see it, because the budgets come in, this budget will pass, right? Many administrative decisions have been taken, and many administrative decisions will continue to be taken. To just, since he knows more about Indian politics than I do, I can remind you that the so-called dream budget of Chidambaram's was passed by a United Front government in 1997, which for the first and the only time in India's history, including 2 ministers of Communist Party of India. Right. And they were not just some sideways ministers. One was the Home Minister, one was the Agriculture Minister, right. Indrajit Gupta and Chaturana Mishra. Right. Disinvestment Commission was set up by the United Front government, which was effectively a left right. government. Right. That government fell in the middle of the budget session, when Chidambaram's dream budget had not yet been passed. Parliament was reconvened, and they guillotined that budget. Everybody agreed to pass that budget. Right. So there is method in this madness. Right. So, you know, we don't have time, but in those beautiful 40 years of great stability in India, you got 2.5% of growth. Mm-hmm. As instability increased in India, political instability, your growth rates went higher. Right. So instability, if institutions remain strong, then political instability makes politicians deliver better. It makes them come out of their trenches and compete. So I don't see instability the same way as you might. Of course, I have fun with instability.
Yes, that's a wonderful insight.
But let me just, from the point of view of investors, what does this mean? I think that right now there is something very positive, and that is the fact that this finance minister has obviously convinced this government, and they are on a reformist path. This is unprecedented because they are talking it's not reform by stealth. They've really come out of the closet, and the way they defended the FDI for foreign investment in retail, supermarkets, and so on, plus other things. So now this period is, you've got about 6 months as investors. And this makes, what is it? Make hay while the sun shines. For the next 6 months, really, this is a time when we will see that ratings possible downgrade really scared the hell out of the country. It was as traumatic a moment as the 1991 moment. And so I do think that there is something positive right now which we can build upon. I think the markets are going to reward those. And don't look for big reforms, because they have to go through Parliament. The parliamentary process is not a very quick process. Some reforms will take place, and they will go through Parliament. But the thing that you should watch for is the actions of the government. There's a lot the government can do, even without, just by implementation, just by action, day-to-day action. Watch the committee, the Cabinet Committee for Investment, CCI. How many projects is it clearing every week? There are 900 projects that were stuck mostly for environmental reasons. And therefore, are we going to get the Minister for Environment to come and say that, look, I'm not stopping the projects? Is she going to get up there? Or the Power Minister, listen to the Power Minister saying that, look, we are getting our act together with regard to power generation and coal, the plant load factor, how is it rising? The Coal Ministry has promised very quick PPPs. Watch those PPPs, because how they'll get the process started. I think this will raise the confidence of the investors. Railways also, PPPs again they've talked about. So far, they weren't creating that level playing fields for them, for that to work. So those are the steps, I would say, for the next 6 months. I think the political process will take over after that. And, you know, things are going to basically, politically, they'll come to a standstill. But if these moves are made, then the institutions will be back on the right
Thank you, sir.
track.
We have time for a few questions.
If I can just add to that, since you talked about instability, big economic reform of 1991 was carried out by a minority government. Right? Narasimha Rao did not have a majority. Second, to add to what Gurcharan said, I don't think it was something as virtuous only as the fear of ratings downgrade that made the Congress party change. I think it was also the fear of getting wiped out in the elections, because so many internal opinion polls told them that they may not even touch the number of 100 in a house of 540. And 100 is really a cutoff mark, because below 100 you're not taking seriously. So I think they just said that, look, now we figure that what we were trying is not working. Yeah. Particularly when they got completely thrashed in the elections of Bihar and UP, are two most important states in terms of number of MPs sent to parliament. And these elections were held by, election campaigns were led by Rahul Gandhi himself. I mean, they performed so badly that I can tell you, out of 243 seats in the state of Bihar, Congress party won only 8, but in 221, its candidates lost their deposit, which means they got less than 6% of the votes cast. So that taught the Congress party that all this was not working.
Let's take, thank you, sir. Let's take a few questions from the audience. Are there any? Yeah, there is one.
Thank you. It's very interesting talk. One couple of questions, and the first one is, with the DMK leaving the coalition today, what are the chances that the government will the ruling coalition government will see out its term and we will make through to next year for elections? And the second one is just regarding the middle class. I've always been told that the middle class in India has really stayed out of politics, but if growth is coming down, we're probably not going to be seeing the income rises that we've been seeing previously. So it may mean that the middle class is much more amenable to become involved with the politics.
Let Shekhar answer the first one. I'll just quickly say about the middle class. You're right. The middle class doesn't even vote. But where we have seen the power of the middle class in the last few years is in the protest movements, using the social media tools. And we have seen, I mean, the middle class has tasted success with the ally, of course, was the media with them. But the protest movements, they have not solved the problem, but they've made people aware. Whether it was the anti-corruption movement or the recent movement called Nirbhaya of violence against women. And so these have been remarkably successful in actually shaking up the political class, and political class having become aware that people really want a different kind. They want public goods. They want law and order and things like that, and they want a corruptless society.
Well, I think DMK, if the other two stay on, keep supporting the government from outside, that is SP and BSP, the two parties which actually fight the Congress party in Uttar Pradesh. But that's the way Indian politics is, because as I said, the fault line in Indian politics is secular, non-secular. So any party which has to fight the BJP in its state then tends to support a Congress-led coalition. So if those two continue to support it, the government could go on. Having said that, nobody can guarantee elections will take place next March, because in any case by March 15 next year, a new parliament has to be constituted. So elections can take place, I suppose, any time between November and March. As to your second part, middle class has become very important. In fact, if you look at 2009 election results, every city in India voted Congress party. Delhi 7 out of 7, Bombay 7 out of 7, Calcutta 8 out of it, Congress party and its allies. So all the cities waited for Congress and UPA because they thought the government had given them growth and they liked Dr. Manmohan Singh. The Congress party has now spent 4 years punishing those cities in the middle class, because they cannot accept the idea that somehow Dr. Manmohan Singh and his policies got them a second term. They have to transfer that credit to the Gandhi family. And the Gandhi family is povertarian. Povertarianism is a very Indian philosophy. You don't find it anywhere else in the world. And basically it's defined as poverty is my birthright and I shall make sure you have it. Right? So that's the way Gandhi family has run its politics. So Congress party has spent 4 years trying to turn the verdict of 2009 upside down, and it's paying for it. So the middle class now is very important, even electorally.
I'm afraid just when the discussion was heating up, we ran out of time. So thank you, Gurcharan, thank you, Shekhar, for a wonderful discussion. Thank you all for turning up.